Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Public Safety Work Session of Monday, July 7th, 2025. Today we have three topics on the agenda: a briefing on the police radio encryption, an update, the second one is an update on the police consent search policy and the implementation and the outcomes, and the third one is an executive regulation number 1225, policies and fees for alarms in businesses and alarm users. We don't have votes on the first two, but we will have a vote on the third one. And as I begin, I would like to thank Ms. Farag for once again preparing the staff reports for the topics today, and for once again and always assembling a most informative packet for us. Unless the other committee members have any questions or comments, I'm going to turn to the panel, ask them to introduce themselves, and if they have any opening comments, and then we're going to ask Ms. Farag to lead us through the package. I'm going to start on them, please.
Good morning, council members. Lieutenant Cody Fields, I'm the Executive Officer for the Management Services Bureau.
Good morning, Assistant Chief Nicholas Augustine, Chief of Management Services Bureau.
Good morning, Darren Frank, Assistant Chief, Chief of Patrol.
Mark Yamada, Chief of Police.
Good morning, Jason Kokinos, 3rd District Commander.
Thank you. Do you have any opening?
I do. Thank you, council members and committee. So we'll start out with, obviously we're talking about radio encryption, and contrary to what some may believe or say, moving towards radio encryption has become a necessity for law enforcement, not just regionally, but nationally. Not wanting, it's not due to trying to hide from the increased scrutiny caused by national events, of police misconduct, as some have suggested, but due to the rapidly evolving technology that has allowed individuals to gain an advantage over law enforcement, thereby facilitating criminal activity. And I think Commander Kokinos can speak to this, but recently several individuals engaged in criminal activity in the East County area were interviewed post-arrest, and they said, yeah, everybody, all our friends have this app on our phones, and we know when you're coming, we know where you're going, we know what you're doing, and we use that to our advantage. We have seen instances where inaccurate information is passed along that has served to increase community fear and panic. Real-time access to first responder dispatch information has only fueled the increase in the number of swatting calls we've seen. Perpetrators like to listen to the response they have created, and it drives them. It also endangers the lives of innocent homeowners and our first responders when they're responding to calls for service. This has also been seen during actual critical incidents like the one at Magruder High School. We saw parents responding unannounced, and even the suspect got information. He knew, we knew who he was, and I think he used that to advantage. Thankfully, it turned out the way it did, but certainly it jeopardized the safety of all first responders involved in that incident. Detailed call information such as medical diagnoses, personal contact information, and other intimate details, personal information, can expose the department to liability and cause unnecessary risk and embarrassment to those involved. And I'll cite a recent critical missing persons case that we were involved in, where information was obtained by the investigators. It was relayed over the radio. There was no malicious intent on anyone's part. The family felt that it was inaccurate. They were embarrassed, and they demanded an apology from me, which I gave them. But you can see all of these things, the negative impact this causes, not only to our department, but all first responders. AC Frank was involved in the initial implementation, and AC Augustine and Lieutenant Fields have taken over oversight of our processes, and they can provide you with additional information. So I'll turn it over to Nick and Cody.
All right, we just have a brief presentation on PowerPoint to go over about the radio encryption, and then answer any questions that you have. So Montgomery County Police has been able to encrypt all of our radios since 2016. We've had the ability. And what we originally started was encrypting our tactical radio channels, and then encrypting our secondary channels for our operations. But our dispatch channels have never been encrypted until we recently started this process. And this is not a new process in law enforcement. Many agencies have been using radio encryptions for many years. So at this time, after we saw several incidents we decided to fully encrypt our radios and have already started that process and are in the final phase of it. So what is radio encryption? Radio encryption is securing our transmissions via a key across the department and limiting the ability for public or outside users to listen to those transmissions. This protects critical and sensitive information over the radio as commonplace, and by allowing it to be publicly available poses a threat to the safety of not only the first responders, law enforcement, and firefighters, but also to the public in general. The primary reason to protect the sensitive information in our community is we transmit everything over the radio. We give date of births, we give names, we talk about what occurred in the incident, relationships to others, phone numbers of others. So all the personal information that is out there, especially in the time of technology where we worry about identity theft and we worry about other agencies receiving sensitive information that may be used for other reasons. So it's important for us to keep that secure and have that trust with the community to know when they are giving information to 911 or they're giving information to our officers, that they know that information is protected. And they have a sense of trust that, you know, their neighbors or another law enforcement agency outside of ours is getting that information and using it in any other way. There's a lot of preliminary information being transmitted that law enforcement has not verified yet. And for the sense of fairness, we always say someone is presumed innocent until proven guilty. And having that information out there, how can that information, if it's heard by an employer, if it's heard by a neighbor of someone that is being accused of a crime, how is that going to affect them into the future? One incident that I hear on a basis on the radio is our officers respond to a call at our apartment complex. They get up to the front door and the door is locked and secured by a code. They ask our dispatcher, what's the code to get into the building? And they are provided that information over the radio. I hear it on a daily basis, and it's not like the officer has time to go back to their car, get into their MDT, and have it sent over the computer. So now those apartment complexes are not rekeying their system, and that information is publicly out there. Whether you have a delay or not in the radio communication, that code is out there for the public, and those that have criminal intent to get into the building at any time of the day now have a way to get into the building and have it be unsecured. And that is a concern of ours with the community. But also thinking about the re-victimization of victims. If we have a sex assault victim, especially a minor, and their parents call the police to report a sex assault, that information going out to neighbors, going out to fellow students, of not knowing the whole circumstance of the sexual assault, but realizing that person has been victimized and thinking of the long-term consequences of that, where re-victimization, the trauma of that, being asked at school or being asked in place of employment what happened or what's going on, and so on. So understand that important element of this is not only just to protect our law enforcement officers, but to also protect the re-victimization of our community and to secure buildings and other facilities in the county. In addition, is national best practice and a security policy imposed by the FBI for access to CJIS databases. FBI runs CJIS and mandates encryption. So all the information that an officer asks to determine if someone is wanted, to obtain other information that is included in CJIS, whether it's background information. We now do have our real-time crime information center, which also to have it be not only successful, but be prudent for the officers to get real-time knowledge. Information has to be transmitted quickly to the officers and investigators out there. So to ensure that we are complying with the CJIS and providing CJIS information over the radio, we need to ensure that is encrypted to follow along with this policy. Again, police departments broadcast medical information and fully identifying information about people, suspect, witnesses, and victims of crimes. We do have 10 codes that we used in the past, but we did switch to plain English back after 9/11, so we can all work on interoperability across many agencies. So it's not like we're using codes in the past to distinguish if someone is wanted, to distinguish if someone has a communicable disease, or so on. All the information is out there so we can interop together across multiple agencies. So this information is being broadcasted out. When not encrypted, open to listening in real time, and people can record information for privacy, for identity theft, or for other reasons. As Chief Yamada spoke about, swatting incidences increase with open transmissions. We have in Montgomery County is a very diverse community, as along with political officials and other that represent our community. And we have seen many times over the last couple of years where they have been victimized of swatting incidents. And we have been able to respond to them, so it's not directly impacting those residents, but we want to limit the reduction because our officers are also responding to these incidents in an emergency situation and making sure that we decrease the process and mitigate the risk as much as we can. MCPD, again, has always encrypted all channels other than patrol operations for years. Our channels will be encrypted and the process is underway. We are in the final phase of this now, and we are working on the vehicle encryption at this time. The concern about transparency, we are committed to transparency, and there's other ways to get this information. Our PIO, our Public Information Office, works in a timely fashion to get information out to the public when there is a critical incident occurring. But we also have ways through the MPIA request for those in the community to request information about past incidents. Our transmissions will still be recorded, and they will still be available through MPIA request. There was concerns about those that now go to social media to get their news because other media outlets don't broadcast in live time. But I have always been told we want the community to come to our social media. We want them to come to us for the news and should not be going out to other resources to get information. They should have that trust with Montgomery County Police to get that, and we are going to build on that to make sure we are timely and making sure our critical information is getting out as quick as we can so the right information is out there, and it reduces the risk of having rumors or other information that is not true, especially in critical incidents. We've seen it, especially across this weekend. There was a law enforcement agency, I'll say on the Eastern Shore, where a lot of people go visit during the summertime, where there was information that there was a shooting on the boardwalk. The law enforcement agency immediately put out that it was fireworks, but the information was already spreading throughout there. And that department also does have encrypted radio systems. So it's making sure the law enforcement agency is on top of getting information out there to disperse any rumors that are occurring. And who else in the region has encryption in radios? And this is all the agencies within the National Capital Region that do have encrypted radio systems. And we would be one of the ones coming up on board with that. Many of these agencies had it over multiple years, and now we are coming into the age of coming into full encryption. The local impact. Encryption will be applied to all municipalities that do use our radio system, and there will be no additional cost. All radios are currently equipped to have the encryption capability, so there will be no additional costs, and our municipalities will also be on board with the radio encryption. And in summary, encryption is necessary in today's environment to protect the information and data of the community and to keep our law enforcement officers and first responders safe. Again, we are committed to the transparency and public trust, and we'll continue to push out information about incidents, stay connected via our public information and our MPIA requests. We recently advertised internally to increase the number of our decentralized public information officers, which will help better support information in real time, around the clock, 24 hours a day and 7 days a week. And I'll turn it over to Susan.
You good?
Sure.
Please.
I'm sorry. Good morning, everyone. I gave a little bit of information in the staff report. Chief Augustine and Chief Yamada have covered most everything. I have some additional information in the staff report that deals with the state of Colorado. There are several police departments there that fully encrypt their transmissions. The state of Colorado decided to pass a law that requires a communications access policy for verified credentialed media outlets. That has become a struggle between various police departments and the media out in Colorado. And they're still wrestling with that, but that is a desire that the state of Colorado wants. I will say that Former Chief Art Acevedo of Aurora, Colorado, was going to unencrypt his dispatch channels at one point to be more transparent to the public. However, the state of Colorado had also just passed a law that either shielded or redacted juvenile information from the entire criminal justice system. So we decided not to do that because they could not protect juvenile identifying information. Baltimore City is another jurisdiction that has encrypted but has offered another way to get some more transparency, and they've delayed their dispatch feeds by 15 minutes. That might address some of the tactical concerns that the police departments have, but it doesn't address dealing with personally identifiable information for anybody in the community. So looking at the potential discussion questions that I've listed for you, is trying to understand the best balance between police being able to effectively and safely do their jobs, as well as provide that type of safety to the community that they're serving, as well as being transparent and open. And I will note that Montgomery County has had Data Montgomery for at least 10 years, I believe, and one of those data sets is the police dispatch data set. And I look at that several times a day. It's updated every 6 hours. So you know by the 100 block and street name what police are going for and how they close out the call. So that it's not the most user-friendly database, but that data is there, and it's available for anybody to see and very quickly. So my discussion questions are more directed toward how do you balance, police operations against community transparency, and is there going to be a delay in getting this information out to the public if the police are fully responsible for making sure that gets out through Public Information Office or whatnot? So are there additional resources needed? Is there enough redaction? I mean, that was a big concern for a long time in the police department, whether or not they had enough staff to do the redaction required by MPIA requests. Is that going to increase? Does encryption impact or jeopardize interoperability with other neighboring jurisdictions or mutual aid partners? And are there any plans to create public reader-friendly logs or summaries of dispatch activity? They do weekly crime summaries. Is there a need or a benefit to doing dispatch summaries?
Is that, well, let me just start off by saying I was a person who listened to a scanner for many, many years. I was in the store and I'd see the police go flying by, and I'm nosy, so I would want to know what they were doing. And I bought a scanner, more than one over the years, and I would listen, and I enjoyed it. It was like a form of entertainment, but unfortunately, in today's world, we can't be entertained that way anymore. And anybody, and to the points earlier, anybody that has a phone, which is anybody you ever meet, has an app that can do it. I did it on my phone. I mean, you could be in the car and you would do it. I understand, and I'm sorry that we've gotten to this point. I really am. But I understand why we need to do this. It's as an example for the body-worn cameras, which we've all gone through over the years. There's a time that you have to redact something, and it's not for non-transparency. It's because someone is in the bathroom. Things happen that the public can't see and shouldn't see. I mean, that's just what we have. And the idea for juveniles and re-victimization, swatting, that was never an issue before. Whoever heard of doing that? But of course it happens pretty much all the time, probably somewhere, every day, somewhere. I'm, as I say, I'm sorry we've done this. And you talked about the 10 codes. Yeah, they were sort of secretive the first time you listened, and then you figured out what the 10 code meant. I mean, even if you didn't have a friend who was a police officer, you knew darn well what they were saying. I mean, not every code. And the whole idea for the redacting, it takes time and money. And even if it was only the money, even if we came up with the money to do somebody who could redact it, 15 minutes isn't going to work. I mean, how many times are you all on calls that are longer than 15 minutes? And so that person who wants to do harm, and it's the minority of the public that wants to do harm, but it's what we have to deal with. That person who wants to do harm is only going to wait 15 minutes and then they do their harm. That's not helping us. So as much as I would prefer that we not have this, I understand it and I'm supportive of it. I do think for the one question, I think everything else has probably been answered, but for the one question about the interoperability with neighboring jurisdictions, I know that the municipalities, they're on air dispatch system, so they're certainly in, but does it cause a problem for if somebody has to come in from Prince George's County or some other jurisdiction?
No.
No, it doesn't. We're identifying, we actually had an event a couple weeks ago where we identified a shortcoming, and we've now gotten that agency on board with the technology they need, the encryption, and it's no cost to them.
Okay, I have nothing else. Anybody else? Please.
Thanks. Yeah, I understand the concerns. Appreciate the briefing. A couple of things, just clarity in the packet that it says that this is needed in part for compliance with HIPAA and with PII, but we're not. The police are not beholden to HIPAA laws, so there's not like a legal and PII. With both of those, there's not a legal compliance issue there. I understand the kind of general privacy concerns that the public may have, but I just want to make sure that we're being clear with the public that this is not, we're not currently legally incompliant with that law.
Correct.
Yeah, thank you. And I think that the presentation today was clearer on that you're talking about protecting the privacy of residents, et cetera, but just terms like saying that we are moving to be in compliance with the law. I just want to make sure that we're very clear with these like public documents and information that we're not saying that we're not in compliance with something that we are. Yes, Chief.
I don't know if it would help, but I asked our legal counsel, Haley Roberts, to be here, and she's in the back if you had a specific question.
She's hiding in the back.
About that, she might be able to provide some additional clarity, but.
Sure. I checked with the county attorney, who does not think that there is a legal compliance issue in regards to HIPAA or PII here. So that would be, which doesn't mean that it's not a valid question, of course.
It is a valid concern. I mean, if somebody, and even though we don't have to file a HIPAA, if it's on the air that so-and-so has this as an issue, not that somebody's finding out something that the neighbor didn't need to know.
Right.
Yeah.
So I think that's the conversation.
Yeah.
Is are we trying to safeguard? Is this a conversation about our opinions about us trying to protect the what somebody might feel is private information that they don't want out there, et cetera? That's a different conversation than legal compliance, and I think it's important for us to just be clear about that, if that makes sense. And then, so the part that I am concerned about is the staffing cost, as Ms. Farag brought up. So do we have estimates on, like, if there's staffing needs that are anticipated, or where we are on that right now, like how long it takes for somebody to fulfill an MPIA request, and as we continue the encryption process, how that might increase and what we need to do to ensure we're able to handle that?
Sure. So since this process is still underway, we haven't received any information yet. We do not see it being a heavy redaction lift, as we don't foresee getting that many requests among a certain time frame. So depending on what is being requested, how the relationship is to the information being requested, that's going to be an important aspect there, in also working with the county attorney's office on what needs to be redacted in the voice transmission. Now, when we do body worn camera, we redact certain images from there, which is a lot more time consuming than doing audio redaction. So we currently do have staffing that is doing redaction, full-time staffing, as well as contract staffing. And depending on the need, if it increases, we do have the ability to bring additional contractors in to assist with the redaction.
And that's something that can be, that's civilianized,
Yes,
I
it is. It's
assume,
all
and so we don't have to worry about sworn officer time or anything
Correct.
in regards to that. Okay, great. I think that's something that'll be good to keep an eye on if we're seeing an increase there, and if we need to do something to account for that, to make sure that we're still delivering timely information and what the cost is, et cetera. moving forward, but it's good to know that the estimate is that it will not be that much. And then the other thing that I'd like to keep an eye on also is like who's making the request? What's the cost to the public? We know now that it can be pretty expensive for somebody to request something like this. And so there's an equity issue that comes into play there. And, we're a county that we want to err on the side as much as we can of, transparency and equity. And so how much are we saying that there's an overlap, that there's an issue there? Go ahead.
Yeah, and my thought on this is there'll be very few requests to get old radio transmissions. Most of our requests now is for what is going on now in my community. Why is there a police car going down the street? Why is there 5 police cars? That's going to be the what we think the concern is going to be in getting the information out to the community, to contact our public information office to get that information, and making sure our social media sites, all 3 of them, are up to date, and making sure the community knows about our Facebook pages and other pages we have that we put live time information out. I don't see a lot of requests coming for old information unless someone wanted that to publish somewhere else or to put on something. I just don't see a high request for someone requesting old radio transmissions. Most of the time we get them now or for the state's attorney's office for domestic violence cases or other criminal cases where they need that for court purposes. But of course, we're always going to have the MPIA to provide the information. We just don't see it being a high demand for old information.
Yeah. I mean, given that people can find that right now, so they're not going to, for the most part, they don't need to go through those channels. So there might be an increase which is the idea, to make it harder to access for the privacy and security for all the reasons listed today. So it may be that people are accessing it and using it, but they're not going through this request process, and so that's where we may see an increase. And I think I think that's kind of like a keep in touch with the community. What are we seeing and hearing there? Are there ways that we can address it? Is this a staffing? I think that's where we'll want to keep an eye on that to make sure that we're addressing any equity concerns that may arise and staffing concerns that may arise there. I think that's all I have. I appreciate the keeping us posted and keeping us updated. The delay factor that Ms. Farag brought up makes sense as well, but that addresses the tactical issue, but not the issue about if there's sensitive information, et cetera. So
There's also, just so everybody understands, there's a significant cost to the delay.
Yeah, that's what I was wondering. I mean, especially if you're going to include redaction on that, now that sounds potentially more expensive than dealing with the MPIA thing where you're just redacting it on request. So anyway, various things to weigh, but I understand where you all are at, and I just want to make sure that we're being, again, very transparent with the public. If we have nothing to hide here, so I just want to make sure that we're being very clear and transparent about the why, so that we can have those conversations if concerns continue to arise. Or if concerns do arise, hopefully they don't. Thanks.
Please.
Yeah, and thank you for highlighting the why, but there are a couple of whys, really. You do need to have interoperability with other entities, and particularly since, especially during large-scale events, you have folks from different departments and everyone together. And we do need to make sure we're in compliance with CJIS protocols, right? So, but also, HIPAA information is transmitted often in these calls. This came up during the discussions about the 911 registry bill, the voluntary registry bill, right? And there were folks who vociferously argued against that because they would say, well, I would not want to put my information in the CAD because I wouldn't want my health information or the personal health information of my child transmitted. And yet, when someone calls 911, they're giving out their best guess of personal health information at the time. Some of it may be well-informed, some of it may be not well-informed at all, but that's what comes out, that's what first responders have to rely upon. And while MCPD isn't a HIPAA-covered entity, MCFRS is, right? So it's all the same information, and it's all utilized for those purposes, which is to provide services to the public. And, the MPIA certainly still provides
an effective avenue for those who would want a copy of the call or who would want the information, but also allows for that pause and discernment of what might need to be redacted, because depends on who the requester is as to the level of information they are entitled to have. And that's something I haven't looked at those portions of the MPIA in a while, but that's something we may want to think about in greater context as well. The rule of the MPIA is that you are supposed to err on the side of disclosure, but also you have to make sure you're protecting sensitive information that belongs to an individual. The first case I ever worked on as a law clerk was a felony murder case that involved someone who used a boom box and a cassette tape and recorded a call between the defendant and his wife, where they were using a scanner and they were talking about where he had disposed of various pieces of evidence. And it was convoluted, and it involved the wiretapping statute, and it involved, so we do have a thing there for those who want to record and potentially do things with stuff they're picking up on a scanner. But it's not enough to stop potential harm, right? Or in that case, require a very lengthy explanation of the attenuation doctrine in the case. And we need to make sure we're protecting victims and the accused as well. Because when the information's coming out instantaneously, if there is an arrest, they are still accused, not convicted, and yet that information could be used in the wrong kind of way, and may assume things, or there may be facts that were transmitted as a part of the call that end up not being facts that are real or germane to the incident that actually is unfolding on the ground. We know that, and from some of the stuff we've talked about with respect to the drone as first responder program, right? So the call comes in, it's a call for which you would dispatch the drone for something that's in progress, but the drone gets on site and sees that it's not exactly what was perceived by the caller, right? And then they're able to give that information back and better handle that call. And we need to be mindful of some of the offenders being juveniles as well, right? So out of all of that, taking a balanced approach to this and making sure we join the other jurisdictions that have already moved to this is incredibly important. And I noted that both Anne Arundel County and Queen Anne's County are already on the list. And I know that particularly for those two jurisdictions, because of the Bay Bridge, that with respect to suicides or attempted suicides on the bridge, those are not reported by the media. And that there's long-standing sort of agreement to not report on those when they have occurred or are underway, unless, sometimes there have been some where it's a substantial traffic backup and people do become aware. But they try to minimize that because of copycats, right? And so I'm assuming that in moving fully to encryption of the the six channels that need to be encrypted, that you'll develop a policy for dealing with the media with respect to certain types of things and how best to make sure you're getting accurate, timely information out to keep the public informed, but also understanding, the sensitivities that may be at play and not wanting to cause more significant harm in the community, right? Vicarious trauma is real. And so by not having people listening to it live, you are also reducing that kind of impact to our community, which is separate from those who want to arrive on scene and potentially interfere with the work that needs to be done or create other safety situations in the work that you're doing. So I fully support this and look forward to hearing more about how things go post-implementation with respect to MPIA requests and whether they become larger. And I I haven't looked at your website to see if you put the form on there for people to get a fee waiver, but that is something you can do to the extent that there are equity issues at play. That is a process that folks can avail themselves under the MPIA. Back to you.
Thank you very much.
Just to be clear, one last point. When it comes to pertinent, verified, public safety information, that information is given to the public. We work closely with Dr. Stoddard, I believe, is here, OEMHS. I would call him frequently during critical incidents and give him the information. He would then relay it virtually instantaneously to the public. So that partnership remains in place. It's not like the public, it would be a 24-hour delay before they got all that information. So
Appreciate that. Ms. Frog, is there anything else on the questions that you had? I think you got them all, but I think
that covers it to the extent that information is going to be delayed getting to interested parties. What can the department do to make sure they get it in a timely manner?
Okay, very good. Well, thank you all very much on this topic. We're going to go to the next topic, if I can figure out where my papers are here. The next topic that we have is the update on the police consent search policy and the implementation and the outcome. Any opening comments on that?
yes, thank you, council member. For the past 5 years, we've had ongoing discussions on traffic stops and consent searches, and more specifically, in the last couple of years, they've focused on consent searches related directly to traffic stops. Throughout this time, the department has actively and willingly listened to feedback to better understand the concerns that have been raised, and has continued, as chief, I have continued our practice of increasing the requirements and placing a heightened emphasis on training and documentations that officers need to follow in these situations. I think it's important to remember that the requirements that the Montgomery County Police Department has in place go far beyond what is legally required of any other law enforcement officer in this county, the state of Maryland, and in the country. My goal as chief is to ensure the constitutional rights of the community members are upheld. In doing so, we have added additional layers of review, implemented the use of an app for better tracking and data collection, which AC Augustine will highlight today, and I would point out that we continue to refine this process. In addition to our increased internal scrutiny, there are two outside entities independent of the police department, the PAB, the Police Advisory Board, and the ACC, the Advisory Commission. They are tasked with handling all complaints generated by the public. Their direction is to identify trends or patterns of conduct that raise concerns about potential police misconduct. To date, there have been no identifiable patterns, trends, or concerns raised about officer conduct, about abuse of power, intimidation or coercion, false statements, or any other egregious violations specific to officers requesting consent to search during a traffic stop. AC Augustine will discuss what we have seen as part of our internal review process. A traffic stop, I remind you, can be conducted to enhance traffic safety, but it also for investigative purposes. And sometimes those reasons can merge together. You will hear in this report that over 23,000 traffic stops were conducted since we last spoke about this issue. And in 99.6% of those stops, they resulted in no further action being taken by the police officer. That means that officers asked for consent to search in only 0.4% of the time. This is an incredibly small percentage, and it shows that this tool is not being used randomly, but with narrow focus to disrupt and prevent crime. We are directing our officers based on data, which coincides with where our communities are asking and oftentimes begging for help. High crime areas, areas with the highest call volumes, areas with identifiable crime trends. There are also areas where crime victimization has disproportionately affected people of color and our vulnerable population. And again, Chief Augustine will provide some details on the outcomes. During the rollout of our new app, I've continued to emphasize training and increased oversight and accountability of our officers. We continue to seek ways to improve, and I've promised from the beginning that our officers would police fairly and constitutionally. I'm proud to say that everything that we have done over the years, being asked to capture interactions on body-worn cameras, increased accountability along with the increased scrutiny afforded by the review of 2 external review groups, as well as being asked to provide detailed additional documentation, all of this has shown that the Montgomery County Police Department and its officers do exactly what I'd expect. We continue to use the tools that are allowed us by law effectively and not randomly, and that our officers police fairly and constitutionally, period. We will continue to refine our processes, and we appreciate the input that we have gotten thus far from the community and the council members. And I turn it over to Nick and Cody.
All right, good morning again. So our consent search policy took effect at the end of 2024, and we have a PowerPoint presentation to go over this information as well as the data. So prior to this policy, consent searches were, information was gathered through paper and was submitted to their supervisor and along with the report and ultimately tracked. So now having technology available, as officers do have cell phones to get that information in a real-time basis to know what consent searches are going on, the reason for consent searches, and the data for it is allows us to more timely and accurately collect the data and do an analysis of this. With the consent search policy, we're trying to ensure constitutional protections for the community members, maintain professional policing by our officers, and also ensure that the consent search tool is being used in a way it should be, and having a review and oversight policy and procedures for that. Again, all the data in this presentation is just related to traffic stops. We conduct many other types of consent searches, whether it's for DNA swabs, whether it's to search a home or for any other reasons, but all this data is strictly related to traffic stops. And taking a review of looking at the Supreme Court requirements compared to Montgomery County Police requirements, you can see that the consent search policy of Montgomery County Police is more restrictive and goes beyond other jurisdictions and beyond both legal requirements. Montgomery County Police not only is imposing a reasonable articulable suspicion requirement on the officers, it adds several advisements, recordings, and review processes, which are not required under the Supreme Court or any other cases. Good. The next slide? Sure. In addition to Supreme Court rulings on consent searches, the Constitution amendments applies to unlawful search and seizures. It is clear in the Constitution that consent searches are voluntary encounters and do not require most things that Montgomery County Police has implemented. This slide shows the different steps through Montgomery County Police and what we have imposed. We require the advisement from the officer to the community member, advising them their right to refuse to consent search. Individuals must verbally acknowledge the advisement and must be advised that consent can be withdrawn at any time. We then go into a documentation phase. All these are recorded on the body-worn camera or mobile video camera system, and it must be recorded in the consent application on the phone. We then have the reasonable articulable suspicion requirement, imposing a high restriction with a reasonable articulable suspicion requirement on why the officer is asking for a consent search in these traffic stops. And the final phase is oversight. Traffic stop consents must be reviewed within 5 working days by a supervisor and or executive to ensure that policy was followed, to also review it, to not only look to see if there's deficiencies, but also see if there's any positive outcomes from this. If an officer did a good job and retrieved a weapon or drugs from a consent search stop by going beyond the traffic stop and really highlighting the positive outcomes of some of these consent searches. And the final is data collection. Case details, demographics of individuals searched, and demographics of officers, as well as the seized property. So our policy implementation, again, it launched November 6th of 2024. The purpose was to improve tracking of consent searches and the ability to provide data to the community and to increase transparency in police operations. The focus on the implementation has been appropriate, effective training, policy implementation and adherence, and effective supervisory oversight that can detect any operational problems or misuse. And again, not always negative, but also looking at positive outcomes that have come from these consent searches. We had virtual training courses provide instruction to officers on collecting data and information from the field interview reports, reasonable suspicion stops, and traffic stops utilizing the new app in lieu of completing the prior paper forms. The data presented is based on app data, while some hard copy forms were still filled out and submitted. The submitting officers were told to also enter them into the application. This is 6 months result from the data implementation related to traffic stops. And since the start, there have been a few trainings created as a use and reminder sent out to officers. So if we saw an issue occurring during our original rollout, we send a reminder out to all officers about how this documentation should occur, give recommendations, as well as working with our training division to ensure appropriate training to follow up with in the future if we are seeing issues that aren't being clear in our policy or what we want to see inputted into the app. Because as we all know, if we get bad data, you're going to get bad results. So you want to ensure you're collecting good data that shows what is actually going on, and we have totality of the circumstances collected in the data that we can report that out to the community and being transparent of what is occurring during these consent searches. Our consent search policy is the highlights of our policy. It states officers will advise a person of their right to refuse consent for a search, obtain verbal acknowledgement of this advisement, have the person decline or approve the consent search, record the advisement, acknowledgement, and approval or disapproval on their body-worn camera or mobile video camera system, document all consent search requests in the application, and for every consent search request, the officer will clearly articulate the circumstances on which consent to search was requested. Most importantly, officers will have to justify and document the reasonable articulable suspicion for even asking for consent to do something subject to executive review. So this takes a look at what the consent search app looks like. These are screenshots from our consent search. So you see what the officer will see on the screen and what information it is collecting, as well as how it highlights the consent search acknowledgement, what is read verbatim to the community member, and whether or not they agree to it. So these are the steps and the information that is gathered throughout our consent search application. One thing that I bring into this, as we see needs to update our applications, most of us that have applications on our cell phones get a new acknowledgement every week. Hey, you need to do a notification. You need to do an update to your application. It's not like an application is put out there and it's good for the entire time. It never needs updated. And that's the same basis that we go on here. We understand that we have our original applications and there'll be different versions that come up as we need to change things or as data collection goes on, or we get feedback from the officers or end users on what needs to be updated in the application so we can make it streamline the process and get the right information and collect the right information you need for analysis. Supervisory review and reasonable articulable suspicion. The policy states that reasonable articulable suspicion should be established before seeking consent, except for rare exceptions. The review, all consent searches for traffic stop are reviewed by a lieutenant or captain within 5 days. We've had training refreshers in January 2025. We had a training bulletin on reasonable articulable suspicion. In December 2024, we had the policy reissuance and on the officer acknowledgement part. Our review findings is a small number lacked clear reasonable articulable suspicion. That was 2 cases. The officers failed to inform the individual of their refusal right. Their supervisor was notified and remedial training was provided to those officers to provide them that information on what they need to do and ensure it does not occur again. Executives are notified as soon as the form is completed, which is required to be completed before the officers finish their shift for the day. There have been minimal issues during the review. When noted that a small number lacked a reasonable articulable suspicion in the app, the review of the review report and other supporting documentation showed more information. So while they didn't have it in the app, if we looked further into it, looked into the incident report, looked into the body-worn camera, the information was recorded in that aspect. Montgomery County Police also has a random review unit that looks through body-worn camera video monthly. They are also looking for violations of the consent search policy, but none have yet been found. We are exploring updates to review process for all consent searches regardless of if it is a traffic stop or not. Again, the app continues to be updated to be more user-friendly, capture better data, and be used as a primary data collection tool for officers. Some feedback was that there were unlimited options for reasons for stop. This was cut down to the common ones, and other was added. The app was installed on all county phones by our Information Management Technology Division, so that accessibility was not an issue. We are working to reduce the number of paper forms that are submitted, but glad that the data is still being captured. And we're also looking at the initial monitoring was 60 days of close monitoring and adjustments. The fallback process, 15 paper forms were used, which were later entered into the app, and the challenges of documenting consent searches in non-criminal contexts. And this would be instances of victims or a missing person that are not related to traffic stops. So we're still working on those challenges to make sure we're getting the right information in. And this taking a look at the data we have gathered so far. There isn't enough data yet to truly show real trends or real impacts. There was 134 requests over the 6-month period, of which 119 granted consent during those 6 months. In looking at this data, where the consent search are mostly being requested, and that is in our 3rd district, the Silver Spring district, of which there were 61, and our 4th district, the Wheaton-Glenmont district, which there was 35. And that's a relatively small number. If you're looking at 134 requests during a 6-month period, and looking at the number of traffic stops that we have had, and the number of encounters with community members we've had on these traffic stops, not just traffic stops of the driver, but also passengers in the vehicle, and 134 being requested. And there is showing a number of those that refused the consent search. It wasn't 100% request and 100% granted. There were also those number that did decline the consent search, and it moved on from there after that. It wasn't persisting or illegal searches conducted when consent was not asked for. But one of the most interesting stats that I saw out of this data, we have several hundred officers in our Patrol Services Bureau. I believe approximately 800 officers? 600 officers that are currently out there. Authorized, we have more. But only 43 officers asked for consent are in this data set. When you have 600 officers out there, and only 43 officers use this tool to further their traffic stop. I look at that as a concern of mine. This is a valuable tool for officers to use, and with a small number, under 10% of our patrol officers requesting consent, that's a concern. But we also have to understand the times, and producing the stop further on, whether it's a specialized unit or patrol officers are running call to call, and most of these stops are being done by our specialized units within the Patrol Services Bureau, and where they have the time of being an uncontrolled unit and can take the stop further if to look for illegal activity, drugs, or firearms. The data shows that the majority of consent searches are asking for consent to be search of a vehicle, which is a less intrusive search, and that's approximately 70%. The majority of consent searches are, again, being performed in our 3rd and 4th district. Why do we ask for consent? Out of the over 29,000 traffic stops during this 6-month period, 0.45% of the stops was consent even asked for. We asked for consent again on 134 times, and 119 times it was granted. During searches, 2 guns were taken off the street, and 17 items of CDS, which was not marijuana, were seized. Additionally, while not counted here, 2 instances of BB guns were located, which were being concealed on a person or in a vehicle. 16% of the time we conducted a consent search, contraband was located, again, not marijuana. And 99.55% of all traffic stops included no consent search request. Again, taking weapons off the streets, whether it's 2 weapons or 50 weapons from prohibited persons. We don't know the ultimate impact of it, but again, it's getting weapons off of there, getting the drugs off the streets, and any number is a quantitative amount to improve the safety of our community. The number of complaints that we've had reference consent searches. In 2024, there were 6 complaints received. Complaints did not originate from a consent search violation allegation. However, a consent search was part of the interaction. Of these complaints, 4, as they included members of the public, were sent to the ACC for disposition. All 4 complaints were exonerated. 2 remain open pending final adjudication. These 2 alleged violations of policy regarding completion of the consent form and not of an actual consent search issue. In 2025, 2 complaints were received. Both are currently open and under investigation. And how are we going to be moving forward? Consent search is an important topic to not only the police department but to the community. We will continue to work with our internal stakeholders within the police department as well as our external stakeholders to determine updates needed to the policy and the ease of use. We will have a 12-month analysis. Again, the numbers currently of 134 is a very small number in a 6-month period. To have a better analysis of this, it would be better to see what our numbers will look like in a 12-month period. We'll continue training the officers and looking for violations via supervisory review process and random review. And we'll continue to fine-tune our consent search operation and continue to work and enhance the public safety while minimizing the burden placed on community members. And again, we will keep looking forward, and we look to have more conversation with the council about this topic and getting information on what you want to see. If there's other data sets that the council or community would like to see, we can work to see how we can integrate them into the application. Next. And moving forward, the reason why particular suspicion requirement preliminarily increased our success with consent search per search. December 2023, we testified that 1 out of 203 consent searches yielded a firearm, and that's a 0.5% rate for firearms. Now with the 2 out of 119, we're at around 1.7% rate for retrieving firearms. But again, this data is very early on, and we'll need to look further on to see how this compares after a 1-year process and the officers being more familiar with the application and how to use it, and also as we get new officers onto the streets that are going through our field training program, and as they are being taught by their field training officers on how to conduct consent searches in the process of it, to evaluate that data as it comes into us.
Any additional? If not, we're going to turn to Ms. Farag. Please.
Thank you. Again, Chief Augustine, Chief Yamada hit on all the salient points that I had wanted to point out, and also answered a lot of the questions. I do agree that there's insufficient data at this point because it's such a small universe of actual consent search requests and approvals at this time that it's very difficult to make some assessments of the data that we have in front of us. So I focused more on policy implementation to understand the app, which the police department developed itself, and they've gone over how they're looking at the app and reviewing it and updating it and fine-tuning it to meet some unintended different types of incidents that have come up. And also the reasonable articulable suspicion, what they're doing when they find out if officers have not asked for that, and the supervisory oversight, right? So I've been conducting my own literature review of consent search studies across the nation. Consent searches are favored by judges and prosecutors. It is a standard exception to the warrant requirement under the Fourth Amendment, period, right? But it doesn't mean all police departments are using it in the exact same way in the exact same neighborhoods. There are 18,000 different police departments. They're all subject to different policies, rules, and regulations. So one of the things I pointed out in December was one study showed that in North Carolina Police Department, in their traffic stops, over half of the searches they conducted were consent searches, right? That seems like they're just casting a wide net. It's a huge fishing expedition. They're just going to try to get what they can get. When you add additional elements, and this is what some of the studies I'm seeing are showing, and I don't have sufficient information, which is why I didn't include it, but I did want to bring to your attention that this is a topic of conversation out there in the research world, is that when you add things like providing more objective cues like behavior at the scene or prior information and intelligence, like does somebody fit the be on the lookout description of somebody? If it's a mid-50s white woman with blonde hair who has vandalized her neighbor's Halloween decorations, you might see more people stop that look like that description. When you add those additional levels, which I believe translates into the reasonable articulable suspicion, it seems to generate a higher percentage of hit rates on actual contraband. So there are two ways that researchers look at the data, the demographic data. That's traffic stops, and then the officer discretion and who they ask to search. So when you add those additional elements like behavioral cues at the scene, if somebody's acting in a particularly suspicious way or whatever, they can speak to that. I don't know what that involves. Does it increase the hit rate? So does that mean that there's some actual value to that consent search request that's getting contraband up off the streets? I think it would be helpful to get more data. As the department said, they'll have more data after 12 months to look at. The hit rates right now, when I ran a test, and it was a basic statistics 100 test of the hit rate differences, 13% of the searches of black individuals resulted in contraband, 25% of the searches of Hispanic individuals resulted in contraband, 12% of the searches of white individuals resulted in contraband, and 20% of the searches of people of other races resulted in contraband. This seems significant on its face when you just look at the numbers, but when you run it through, I did a proportional z-test, it's not statistically significant, and that's just because it's a tiny universe of stops, right? We could change that whole narrative if they had asked 2 more white people to get searched, right? So the more information they can bring back, the more data will provide a better picture. And the other thing that I pointed out about understanding the data is, and I'm beating a dead horse, I absolutely think it would be beneficial for the department to partner with outside academic researchers to look at some of this information. And absent that, there are other departments have looked at different types of risk indexes to benchmark things against, and that's what I put on page 7. Instead of just looking at census data, the San Francisco Police Department, for example, is using 4 different benchmarks. They're using a risk-adjusted disparity index, which looks at the victims of violent crime. They're looking at a suspect-adjusted disparity index, which looks at the suspects of violent crime. And they're looking at not-at-fault traffic crash analytic layout. A not-at-fault driver seems to be a better benchmark to researchers of the actual driving population in an area. So they're using those, and they're outlining the different advantages to those types of analyses, as well as the drawbacks. No type of benchmark is perfect, and if you expand this conversation, you get a more full picture of what's actually happening. The police department did do this a little bit with showing violent crime, and I listed their chart on page 7 that shows calls for service by district, traffic stops by district, and violent crime by district. So of their consent search requests, 45% are happening in 3D and 26% are happening in 4D, and that's where they have higher violent crime reports. So that is a different type of benchmark. What's curious about this, though, however, is that they also have a pretty high violent crime rate over in 6D, but it's only 10% of their consent searches. So that would be a question I would ask. What is happening there? Is there a hit rate? Are those officers in 6D recovering anything? What happens if most of the contraband was recovered where they're doing fewer consent searches? Then what are those officers doing that might be right compared to other people? And so it's an ongoing analysis issue that has to have repeated conversations to really better understand the impact. And again, I had listed some potential discussion questions on page 8, which I believe the department has pretty much answered. So that's all I'm got to say at this moment.
Thank you. To the one question about 3 and 4, Silver Spring and Wheaton versus Germantown, what is someone doing differently in the other 2 areas?
Well, I had brought my famous colleague.
I realize that might be why he was sitting here.
Commander Kokinas, to address some of the issues in 3D. But I mean, you have a variety of commands out there. Some focus efforts in different ways, motivate in different ways, and ask officers to do different things in different ways. Jason can obviously speak to what occurs in 3D, and I know they do a very good job at directed enforcement, addressing crime trends, victimization, things like that, and putting officers in place. And I'll let Jason sort of speak to that. I would have to circle back with you with maybe Chief Frank and get you some information on 6D. But
Commander, please.
Yeah, I mean, every district has situations and circumstances that are different. In Silver Spring, we're really focused on violent crime and saving lives and people being shot and robbed and things of that nature. So we're working, we've seen obviously last year and this year so far, statistically very positive returns on our efforts to interdict folks with guns before they're actually used with shooting somebody. So our shootings, are down. Obviously, our gun seizures are up, and so the mandate is that we police professionally and we abide by the Constitution and we treat people with respect. I will say that a consent search is one tool of the toolbox. It's not used very often, as you can see. I mean, of the thousands of traffic stops in Silver Spring, if we did 60 consent searches so far this year, it's very small. But it is a tool in the toolbox. And the one thing I'll say with regards to outcomes, we would hope not to find contraband on people. We don't want to arrest people. We don't want people to be engaged in criminal activity. But when you look at reasonable suspicion and you have below that just a mere hunch that you I think something's going on. Reasonable suspicion, specific facts and circumstances that the officer sees that they can articulate could be related to criminal activity. Doesn't guarantee it. It's what it does is it says, hey, we should be potentially looking into this a little more. And the goal when you're doing that is to dispel your suspicion as much as confirm. We don't want to assume that people are guilty of something. So a consent search can be a quick way to dispel whether somebody is engaged in crime or not. And the other thing about crime is when we stop somebody, we could have stopped them after they committed a crime and they're still feeling potentially adrenaline or nervous from that. We could get them before they're, so you talk about the success outcomes of consent search, which is worth looking at, but there's a multitude of factors within that as well. So.
And additionally, between the districts, a lot of these consent searches, what we're seeing, are generated by officers assigned to either a central business district team or a DCAT team, district community action team. Some of our districts don't have those officers. 6D does, but they also have far fewer officers than 3D. But I don't know if Darren wants to expand.
The chief hit on it. There are less officers in the 6th district. They do not, while they are authorized a Montgomery Village team, that team is not staffed at this time due to the attrition crisis. So, and then generally as things have progressed, we have a lot of younger officers who are using these tools. They are assigned to the 3rd and 4th districts generally to start their career. As opposed to the 6th district. But the main issue, while they have a lot of, I will say this, Commander Dillman has done a really good job at getting traffic stops up in the 6th district, because I will tell you the numbers there are different than they were last year. So that is a great opportunity for us, and I will continue to work on those kind of efforts in the 6th district. And you may see, and going back to Susan's point on the small number, the small amount of data that's available, we could completely change that whole look in a year. So,
And we have mentioned the year standpoint of the 12 months, this would look better. I'm thinking it needs 3 years. That would be my thing. We're just now, my opinion is, officers are doing fewer of these because of the scrutiny, because of all the conversations around this, because they're being held to this standard of perfection. We're seeing fewer of these stops, fewer of consent searches, fewer proactive enforcement actions across the board. We're just sort of turning in the right direction on those things. I'd be curious, is 6 months enough time? I don't know. Maybe 3 years. I just throw that out there, but just something to think about.
Well, and I appreciate that. To me, the body-worn cameras, which is where you review all of this, really has been a game changer, not just for this topic, but for probably every topic we can talk about. And I think it's necessary to mention once again that the oversight, if someone has a consent search, that you have said that they automatically our supervisor will come in and look at that issue and look at that topic, and that it's not by complaint, and which is a whole different world than some other things, and I think that in itself, and there again, what we have, no one wants anybody's rights to be violated. I don't, at any time, but we want the public to feel safe. We want the sworn officer to feel safe, and that becomes very, very necessary that everybody understands that. As I've said, if you want to search my car, you can, and you can also vacuum it while you're doing it. I mean, I have no problem with that, but I understand there are people that do, and I do think, getting back to the idea about the 12-month, yeah, I don't know that we're going to gain anything more in the next 6 months, but I do think we should get an update to see what we do and what we don't. The other thing I think that we need to do is to, not only do we need the update, but we need to figure out if there's any additional resources that we need to be giving so that your job, the greater department, is easier to do. Whether or not there's other things that we could, through technology or whatever else it is out there, we should certainly be doing that. As I've said a zillion times, if we ask you to do a job and they don't give you the resources to do it, that's not fair at all. So during the time of figuring this thing out, we can figure out if there's any other resources that needed. And the only other question I have, if someone refuses to do a consent search, if the officer asks and they say, no, I'm not going to let you search my car, does anybody check on anything why the officer asked the person to do that?
I think the only follow-up we have right now are for consent searches that are asked for and then granted.
Then granted.
But we have seen on body-worn camera, officers ask for consent, it's denied, and the officers walk away.
And just to clarify, all of them, it doesn't matter if they say no, yes or no. All of the data is captured. So the reasonable
The data is captured.
Yeah, so if I ask someone and they say, no, I don't want you to search it, I will still have the record here, and it still gets reviewed, that they need to write down, they should write down their reasonable articulable suspicion in the app, and then and then it's reviewed.
And I guess that's what I'm asking, is whether or not, if somebody says, I'm not going to do it, and you don't do it, you don't do the search, but that officer would understand or know whether or not they really did have the proper suspicions in order to have done it, even if the person had said yes. And you're saying that that's reviewed, that data is captured.
Yes, it's captured, and one of the things that we're looking at this is how to improve our training and ensure every kind of interaction like this, you draw data from it. Not even this data, but just observational. And Commander Kokinos has done a great job, a couple other individuals in the department, as far as enhancing our training. One of the things we've taken away from this so far is we need to do a little bit more training on how to articulate reasonable articulable suspicion.
That's what I'm asking.
So that's one of the improvements we're looking to make, so that, because again, a lot of the standard for reasonable articulable suspicion, it's not probable cause, it's not the highest levels. It's based on observations, and putting those things together sometimes is difficult. But when an officer sees crime afoot, they generally know it because they have a lot of training and experience.
And keep in mind, RAS it's wide-ranging. For Jason on his stop, it could be 3 things. For me on my stop, it could have been 2. For Darren, 17. So those building blocks can vary, and they can vary greatly when it comes to RAS.
And I understand that, and that's why it's a difficult topic. but that doesn't mean that we can't, that we should be not doing something that we need to be doing. And to take, somebody said, well, so few guns off the street. To me, if you took off a gun off the street of somebody that did use it or was going to use it, that to me is a very important thing that just happened. So,
Yeah, we've seen guns, they're not just used in one crime of violence. They're used in multiple, 5, 6, 7. They get passed around. They go from jurisdiction to jurisdiction, not just district to district within Montgomery County.
yeah.
And just to make note of one thing, with our policy, we researched that there is no other jurisdictions that we have found that does a review of consent searches by a supervisor. So to show that we're an agency that has stepped up and have this extra layer of review that no other agencies that we have researched actually have this level of scrutiny and oversight in their consent search policies.
But having said it, and I appreciate that, having said that, we want to make certain that the officer realizes that they need to be safe as well, and if they have that suspicion.
If I
Anybody
could
else?
make two
Yeah,
quick comments.
please.
So one, just so the public and everyone's aware, we're not only seizing guns on consent to search. A majority of, this is just one tool in the toolbox, a majority of our guns being seized, I could speak for at least in the 3rd District, are non-consent search incidents. So probable cause, canine indication on a vehicle, things of that nature. So I don't want the public or anyone to think that this is the only way we're getting guns, but it is an important tool when appropriate, and that's the thing, it's when appropriate. The other thing with regards to training that we do above and beyond, at least in my knowledge, a lot of other jurisdictions even, is we have teaching reasonable suspicion and constitutional law a retired judge who's also a law school professor. So the quality of instruction to officers is very high. That's for recruits. The officers assigned to our district community action team and our special assignment teams that are doing a lot of targeted, focused crime work, they are mandated to go through additional trainings, each go through a 1-week school before they can even, when they come onto the team or before they come onto the team. And at least for the district community action teams, a chunk of that is additional constitutional training. Not only are we training reasonable suspicion and all those things, but then we go out and do live scenarios where they have to articulate and explain what they're seeing. So again, we go above and beyond what many other agencies are doing to ensure that we're doing it correct for our public.
No, I appreciate you pointing that out. Do you have anything, do you have anything to?
You go, Kristen. Yeah. You might
So who's-
let the woman in the audience know we don't take public comment. She keeps raising her hand.
Excuse me, we don't take public comment at this time, but thank you for being here. Please, did you want to?
All right, thank you for the update, and it's great to hear about all the training around reasonable articulable suspicion, and I want to also appreciate the slide that you had on where the review was done and issues were found and the response to that. I think that that having the transparency about that is really helpful, and shows responsiveness there, and shows the effort to be. To not say everything is perfect, but to show obviously we're doing some new things, here's the improvements, et cetera. I think all of that is really helpful in the public conversation about it. I know you need to do more training, as you mentioned, on how to articulate reasonable articulable suspicion, which comes with its own set of complexities, but obviously is a key part of, being able to do that is a key part of that. How is that recorded or monitored? Do the officers state on their body worn camera what does that look like in terms of the records?
So I'm glad you brought that up, because I do want to clarify. When we talk about articulating the reasonable articulable suspicion, we're talking about the data collection app. So the data collection app has a narrative that you fill, but then we also write an official police report. Then we also have the body-worn camera capturing it. So officers can use a number of different ways. I've seen officers use the body-worn camera to explicitly say things. I think I may have seen an old search from Captain Kokinos where he articulated as he was searching the vehicle exactly what he was doing and why. But otherwise, you have the event report if contraband was found, where you have that written in there. And then we've also seen in the app where people have used every character available to describe it. So there's a number of different ways that it's accomplished. And during the review, if, as I said, if we found deficiency in what's written in the app, the executives have gone back and reviewed the body-worn camera, have reviewed the event report, and have verified, okay, it was there, they just didn't know how to write it as well in the app that they needed.
Got it. Is there a way, can we make sure that that's being recorded in some way prior to the search being conducted, right? So that if they're saying, we saw this, then they have to have noted that before actually finding the thing?
So on a traffic stop, the camera, everything comes on as soon as the lights come on. So
Right.
there's full recording of that. A lot of times with our, if it's a SAT team or a DCAT unit, they are explaining over the camera to their other officers and stuff what they're seeing. So a lot of that's recorded, which we see on the review of the camera. And then obviously that mirrors up with some things that are seen in the app. I think to touch on what the chief said, the reasonable suspicion exists. It's just ensuring that they're writing in the app the way that we want to see it for the data collection. So we're seeing it on review in compliance with legal standard. And a lot of that's captured on the body camera. So those conversations, hey, this is what I have, this is what's going on, I'm going to ask for search. Those things we're seeing during the review. But then they are noting it in the app when they go through the process of actually using the app with the motorist.
Yeah, so it sounds like it would not be like an additional burden on the officer to make sure that you say on camera before conducting the search, articulate all the things, which you will later note in the app, but for there to be a recording of them articulating what that reasonable articulable suspicion, those pieces, that those should be recorded, make sure, even if it's just, they're just talking out loud on the camera, as many are already doing this, but to make sure that that we are specifically asking them to do that, so that, because what the public could say in conversations that we've heard before is, oh, they're saying I suspected there was going to be this thing, but they're saying that because they found it. And if we make sure that our officers are saying it in advance, then we have that there to disprove that.
Yeah, we actually, although it may not be a policy, it is taught as a best practice to do that for that exact reason. We say, hey, when I'm pulling over a car, I use this as my personal assistant, essentially, the camera. Mm-hmm. Stopping this vehicle for this violation. That way, there's if anyone says, well, I believe that was made up after the fact. Well, it was set on my camera early on, mm-hmm. and I think it's that thing that exists it's good for everybody.
Yeah,
So-
I agree, yeah.
But going to your point, and I see where you're going with mandating that it's stated on the camera before asking for a search. These are dynamic officer safety situations. In many cases, that wouldn't be an issue. They could go ahead and do that. But there are a good number of cases where the officer is focused on conducting a safe traffic stop or any encounter, because these consent searches can happen if I stop someone on the street, in the area of a robbery. And they're focused on observing this individual, listening to the radio, observing the environment, and making and gathering reasonable articulable suspicion if they need it, which it generally falls to you. But then to say, okay, hold on one second. For the camera, I saw A, B, C, D, and E. Now I'm going to ask for a search. You can't do that. It puts the officer in jeopardy by mandating a practice like that. But going to what Commander Coquino said, we do train that it is best practice to do that, because then we have the other layers that take over. To your example, they said this and they found that. Well, we have the body-worn camera video that shows what occurred. We have the executive review of the consent search happening. We have, if a complaint is made, it's investigated by internal affairs, and if there's not if, that investigation then goes to the ACC because it's ACC qualified. Then the ACC makes a judgment on whether or not there was an issue there. And then finally, the PAB can look at trends and say, Montgomery County Police, you have 15 complaints off of 30 consent searches. Maybe there's an issue. Let's look at trends. Let's talk with the chief about that. So there's layer upon layer, and going to your original point of making that mandate, it makes it unsafe for officers, and I think we cover it in many other areas.
I hear you, and I mean, again, it sounds like it's a benefit to everybody to have that be a practice that would be applicable in the majority of cases. And so, aside from exigent circumstances or, whatever the particular examples, and especially if we go outside traffic stops, then I don't know what all of those would be, but limited to the traffic stops. If there's particular types of scenarios where that wouldn't apply, then understandable. But I think that it would be very helpful for the public for there to be a general policy that exactly what Commander Coquinos just described, that as they're making these observations and seeing these things, to just name them. It's for their own protection as much as for the accountability to the public who are asking that. It seems like a win-win for everybody. And so I'm glad that it was part of the training, but if there's ways to make it clear that unless there's a real safety issue, by taking the time to do that should be the default practice. And if that's something that supervisors can be looking for upon review, you didn't cover yourself by doing this as you could have, that be part of, as much as is possible, part of the expectation, and that for that to be reinforced. Does that seem reasonable? Or?
Well, and that's where and to touch on kind of, I think where we're coming to in this conversation is, it's a best practice when it's safe and practical to do so. It's not something, even in training, we don't say you should do, you need to do this every time, but it is in your interest, it's in the public's interest, it's in everyone's interest when you can, when it's safe. If like the chief said, if we have an officer safety issue where we think someone might be armed with a gun or something and we're going to ask consent to search them, obviously they may not pause to dictate those things in the camera. But I think there's a balance in everything, but that is definitely something we want for everybody, at least in the training.
And did you have a comment?
I was just going to say, again, when we talk about this policy, this is a Montgomery County Police policy that holds them to a standard far greater than the United States Constitution. And when you get into the area of a policy that we could have an officer make an incredible stop and disrupt a terrible crime, but then be reprimanded for the policy. I think that's when you continue to put more prohibitions on it, you run into those situations. And also the thing that we already know is that officers are doing less consent searches now. In 2023, I believe we reported to the council on situations where we gathered over 12 guns off of consent searches, and that was limited information, and there was many more searches. So this tool is being used less and less, and it is a critical tool that's being used in areas where people are being victimized. People are being robbed, stores are being robbed, people are being assaulted, and it's a tool that allows us to get guns off the road, get real, again, to what Chief Augustine said, not marijuana, cocaine. We're seeing neighborhoods where you have a comeback in crack cocaine, meth, fentanyl, all of these things. And this is one of those tools that allows our officers, and that we hope they would readily use instead of being fearful of it. Readily use it with an outstanding, comprehensive policy that covers both the citizens that are being asked for a search and also covers the officers.
I hear you, and obviously we want to be using the best techniques that we possibly can to make our streets safer. No disagreement, certainly, on that. And we want to be looking for what is effective and what is efficient. We always want to be looking at staff time, the best ways to use our time in order to get to those end results. So, quoting you all, this is not the way we get the majority of our guns off the streets, which makes sense, right? We do excellent investigative work, all of those things, and we're looking to get those guns off the street before they are actually used. And by and large, that's what we are doing in Montgomery County. But this is not our primary tool for that. It has not been historically, and it's not now. if it is useful for other reasons, in other categories, if this is one of our more effective and efficient tools, then that's an argument to make, for those. But I just want to make sure that we're being clear with the public that we have and are using much more effective and efficient means to get those guns off the street, and we're doing it at a rate, that's faster than 2 per, 100 plus stops. We're doing a lot better than what the Constitution requires, and what, state and county law requires, and that's a good thing, because we do have, although we don't have a lot of complaints coming in through the PAB, et cetera, we have certainly all heard from constituents that there are serious concerns and problems. There are people who are, coming out of these consent search experiences, feeling victimized, feeling a lack of trust, feeling profiled, like all of those things. And that's why we have these conversations in the first place, to be able to make improvements there. So given that, if consent searches are down and also, violent crime is down, which it is, and thank you. And, then that's a good thing. So if we are able to do less of those because we are being more tailored and more effective and more efficient, then I would say that is a win. The data that we only have a brief period of data for this one policy update. But what we're doing is comparing it to the past data, and we're looking for improvements, and we're looking for continuing to make improvements. And one of the areas that's really important for us to be looking at is racial disparities. Now, again, this is a relatively small set of data, but the racial disparities remain. So from this relatively small subset, and this is one of the things we're going to want to keep looking at over the coming months and years, are we addressing that? And we're not right now. So Black males overwhelmingly are who is showing up in the data in terms of who is being asked for a consent search. That's not where neither of the two guns were found there. But so what is happening there, and how can we make improvements in those ways? And I think that that's certainly something that's important for us to note and be mindful of, and be looking specifically to make improvements in that regard. And I think that the point about having, asking our officers to have more evidence before they decide that it's worth the time and the effort and the impact on the person in order to do the consent search, I think that makes sense. And we would hope to see those disparities go down, but we're not really seeing that yet. Chief, it looks like you have a comment.
Yeah, we point out the disparities, and there are also disparities in victimization. There's also better ways. Disparities, the way they are shown sometimes, don't indicate a problem. We're asking our officers to go into communities, into specific areas that are higher in minority populations than in other places. They're going to encounter those people in those minority groups more often than they would another group. The factors that Susan outlined in better ways to capture the disparate information, I would suggest we look at those things. It's been 5 years. We have the same conversation over and over and over again. I don't know that there's a problem. You mentioned again the lack of complaints. I've asked every council member, this is just the Public Safety Committee, but I'll ask you again. If there are so many that are adversely affected by these stops, I need to hear about it. They need to say to you what the problem is. It needs to be reported. You need to help facilitate the reporting of those incidents where there's a problem so we can look at it.
Okay, so if I may, I was highlighting that there is not a lack of complaints. We have a lack of complaints that are coming in through the PAB, for example, and that is a reflection on, and what we know then is that is a reflection on their ability to reach the public and have the public know about the ability to make that complaint or follow through. When the PAB has been in front of us, I have shown them on their website now multiple times why it's so difficult for people to make a complaint. The website is not functional, it's not set up well at all, and people are on the first screen and asks you to print out a form and mail it in or deliver it, and you have to click a button that's not properly labeled to find the online resource. So there's a lot of problems with that. But luckily, we do have a good pulse of where people feel on that, because we all sat here and listened for many, many hours during a hearing on a bill that was related to consent searches, and we had people cried. And there were a lot of people here talking about their experience and their feelings about it. And I know that there's a desire by everybody to improve community trust between police and the public, and that was one of the reasons for the bill. But also, if this is what we're doing instead of that, and if this can work, fine, I'm down with that. But we are still seeing those racial disparities, and I don't think that basing whether or not there are issues in the public on whether they're coming through the PAB, we know that that is not a functional measurement tool. So I think it's important conversation to be able to just have realistically and honestly. I'll yield.
Okay. Do you think?
Yeah, sure. The standard that I often heard or I've often seen is when safe and reasonable to do so, or when safe and practicable to do so, right? In the context of different requirements or policies or things that involve law enforcement. Is that your understanding of sort of the typical training for when something is an absolute requirement versus when it's a best practice but may not always be applied?
Correct.
Okay. I appreciate the back and forth about the complaints. I think you're 100% right. Had I ever received any, I would have let you know. My office has not. That being said, I also believe it's incumbent upon us, the same way it is for whether I get a call related to Health and Human Services or, rental assistance or what have you, is that we help walk them through how to do the thing. So the 11 of us, we're not everybody's here, but it's incumbent upon us and our teams to help facilitate those who have those needs. If they need to file a complaint with the PAB, we can teach them how to do that. And each of our offices should be aware of how that website works and how to get it done. And so I firmly commit to making that happen. But I also want to make it clear for the public, because I think it's really important. The reasonable articulable suspicion standard is not new to law enforcement. It is only new as applied in the context of a consent search, because the United States Supreme Court does not require reasonable articulable suspicion for a consent search. However, reasonable articulable suspicion is a legal standard that all officers are trained on for other purposes. So it is one that is familiar to all officers, correct?
Correct.
Sorry. It's like at a deposition. I need you to say something audible. Good. Okay. So, in terms of the training that folks receive both in the academy and as part of in-service or whenever something new is being rolled out, for example, with this, rolling it out to officers who've been on the streets for a long time, it was taking an existing legal standard and applying it to a new scenario, right?
Yes.
Okay, so it wasn't like starting from scratch.
Correct.
But using the app might have been a start from scratch, right?
Correct.
All right. And then in terms of the paper form, are there any circumstances where a paper form will have to be used?
Well, if their app is not working, or if it's broken, or their phone's broken, or to some ability of that, then a paper, but they would then have to enter that data in when they
Right.
get to a
Right.
workable
I meant
situation.
more on the side of the individual whose consent is being obtained. Are there, like, for example, if once you request the consent, if you're discerning that there might be some inability for them to, the officer's phone and the app may be functioning, but there may be some hiccup with the individual not being able to figure out what is required of them, or visually not be able to, because, I'm of an age where sometimes things on the phone are a little hard to see. Is that something where the officers would offer the paper form as an alternative?
Yes, we'd offer it, but the officers do advise and read what is on the screen to them. And if the person does speak a second language or does not understand English, then we do have a officer that is certified as a translator come in and do that information. We're just not handing it to them and say, here it is. We provide them other accessibilities.
Great, thank you. And then with respect to the calls for service and staffing, because the 6th district is obviously a key part of my district that I represent. It also has had the shortest staffing for a long time, yet it's ranks third behind the 3rd district and the 4th district in calls for service, right? So, I certainly appreciate that Commander Dillman has come in and sort of figured out how to manage the hand he's been dealt, right? But the calls for service remain. And so, knowing our officers, our patrol officers, knowing we are about, 200 short, is that right, in patrol?
Yeah.
175. Okay, thank you. We have to make sure we're deploying our human capital in the places where the calls are the highest, correct? And so when you were talking, and I know this is an ongoing concern in terms of staffing, in terms of who's where and how to make things work to the greatest extent possible. And frankly, if a particular hot topic arises in any one of the 6 districts, you would in fact redeploy officers or a specialty team in order to deal with that new hot topic, right?
Correct. We have DCATS teams. We also have central business districts. We can also do overtime details or just directed patrol details.
Right. So that can be in flux, but it is in fact based on objective data, which is the calls for service that are coming into the ECC, right?
Yes, we look at crime trends, things we can disrupt, not just the calls for service. And then also, for the example of the 6th district, we do partner very well with
Gaithersburg.
Gaithersburg.
Yes.
And they do a fantastic job.
Okay. And then particularly for our jurisdiction, our district stations where they have borders with another county, we coordinate with them if something is going on in a particular geographic area too, correct?
Correct.
Okay. So the resources that might need to be available in a particular spot, or what you are aware of as something trending in a particular area, could in fact, on traffic stops, be a factor in, based on whatever is objectively observed by the officer, the other knowledge of alerts or be on the lookouts or other types of information about what's happening in a particular area is useful to formulating that reasonable articulable suspicion, correct?
Correct.
Okay. So I just wanted to tease some of that out because that's important. And I think you said that in 2023, the consent search yielding firearms was 0.5%. There was a higher number of consent searches then. Now we've had a lower number of consent searches, but the firearm recovery is 1.7% of the consent searches.
I didn't assign a number to 2023. I'd have to go back and look if
Okay.
we did that. But one of the problems in 23 was the data was incomplete. It was an incomplete data set,
Gotcha.
which is one of the really nice things about what we're doing here. So 6
Right.
months of very thorough data compared to what we
Right.
had before.
Yeah, it's very hard if you're comparing apples to oranges, but knowing that, relatively speaking, our number of consent searches is fairly low,
Oh, absolutely.
and yet they still are yielding a fair amount of things that we do not want on our streets, right?
Correct.
And we want to make sure everybody's treated fairly, appropriately, respectfully, and having this form, this tool on the app does so, and actually make sure that people are aware of the ability to say no, right?
Correct.
Okay. I think that's it for me. No, a question for Ms. Farag. Is there a way to discern? One of the things that's always challenging in this type of data is where someone takes n equals x, and then the next one is n equals y. Therefore, there's a disparity because the numbers are different. If you're trying to discern statistically significant information that relates to showing a disparity in treatment based on a single factor, would you not need to know whether one group was treated differently then another group, based on that sole factor, where the underlying facts and observations that would have led to the reasonable articulable suspicion, let's say, were identical, in order to discern whether the sole criterion that you're looking for as a disparity is applicable.
Yes, but those underlying facts are rarely identical.
Right.
And that's when you have confounding factors. And
Right.
in my understanding, the best way to address that is through linear regression, and that's not something I can do.
Right.
So,
But that is why you said, partnering with an academic
Right.
institution
Yes.
would in fact yield a better and statistically significant analysis that could be utilized in a
Right.
different way.
So I can tell you that the fact that 77 black drivers were requested to have a consent search done out of 135, that's absolutely statistically significant, right? But as far as the hit rate, since it's such a small number, and again, like you said, we don't know what's identical or what's not, is it based on behaviors, based on a be on the lookout description,
Right. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And Ms. Frog, I think we have answered all these questions that you had. So we're going to move on to the third and final topic, which is the Executive Regulation Number 1225, Policies and Fees for Alarm Businesses and Alarm Users. And we are going to give we are going to vote on this issue. We give a recommendation, I guess. Does anybody want to lead this off? If not, Ms. Farag is going to lead this off.
I can do it. It's a pretty
Okay.
quick lift on this one. The executive's recommending increasing fees and making one technical adjustment to the existing regulations. This executive regulation would repeal and replace what's in code right now. It was advertised in the April Register. They received no comments when it was advertised. It changes, it increases the biannual alarm user registration renewal fee from $10 to $20 and increases the alarm user registration fee from $30 to $60 for commercial alarm users. They've indicated that these fees have not really been changed since 1995, and despite this, inflation has increased administrative costs to run the program. The one technical adjustment that it also includes is that the current regulation requires all alarms must either be UL compliant or it meets specified installation standards. So this proposed regulation adds one more standard to the list, which is any audible alarm must automatically silence the annunciator within 30 minutes after activation. In terms of fiscal impact, the fiscal impact statement that was transmitted with the regulation indicates that county revenues could increase by $260,000 if the regulation is approved. They're projecting total revenues estimated at $1.6 million for FY26. And council staff recommends approval as submitted.
Any other comment? I think, first off, the fact that nothing has been, that we haven't updated this since 1995 says something about what's going on. Obviously, this was a problem in 1995. We've actually had, for false alarms, you've actually had, unfortunately, officers who've been killed because of false alarms over the time, over the years. And so I'm in favor of this. I don't know anybody else. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm fine with this as well. I did have a question about some of the information that was in there while you are with us. So the 7,000 burglar alarm calls, 6,973 burglar alarm calls that police were not required to respond to, which saved a lot of officer time, et cetera. But I wanted to understand the implications of, if there are any, of not responding to those calls. So I understand it says many of these calls were prevented due to unregistered alarm systems, missing legally required dispatch information, and invalid alarm business licenses. Obviously, I'm sure we all want to make sure that officers are being dispatched if there is a need for the officer to be there. And we also don't want them to be dispatched if they don't need to be there. But of those categories, unregistered alarm system, if it's not, does that mean that if it goes off, that it's less likely that there is a crime in process?
I don't think it's less likely. We are noticing a trend that community members are not subscribing to alarm company services as much as they used to before. Due to the many different technologies out there now, you can get an alert on your phone, you can see it live on your phone, and then people are calling 911 because they are seeing something, and it's not a monitoring company contacting police departments. And we're also seeing that with businesses also. They get a notification on their phone that the front door alarm just went off, and they're contacting us directly. So I don't know if it's the number of false alarms that we're getting that are being reported. We don't have any data to show that those are actually crimes that were committed. Of course, if anyone calls the police department and reports a suspicious situation or sees something live or hears an alarm going off, we're going to dispatch officers to that no matter whether it's registered or not registered.
So when it says, okay, so like the Ring cameras or something like that, is that the kind of thing we're talking about?
Yeah.
So like if something like that, I don't have a Ring. So if somebody, if somebody's Ring camera goes off and their phone buzzes and says somebody's trying to enter, and then the person calls 911, but they're not there, but they're like, I just got this alert. Does that fall under unregistered alarm systems?
So that would be dispatched most likely as a burglary in progress, or
Okay.
depending on a suspicious situation. It wouldn't be as an alarm call because we actually have verified information that criminal activity is occurring. So that would be treated differently. But if it's a non-monitored system and a community member calls because they have additional information, if they're just saying my alarm's going off, well, is there other stuff that you see that's going on? Is the weather or something else? So we gather more information on that. But most likely, if someone's calling with an active, suspicious situation, that's going to be treated differently than an alarm call that comes in.
Okay, so trying to just understand what unregistered alarm system, like what that looks like is that like, can Ring contact the police directly? They can't, right? It just was.
Yes, Ring actually does have a service. So the unregistered is if they've let their registration lapse. So,
Okay.
They've let their registration with the county lapse. So we've put in these safeguards because of the amount of, I guess, abuse there was, and then sending officers. And part of the problem with alarms, first of all, I will say this: alarms are a terrific deterrent. I mean, going back in my career, I only remember one residential burglary where there was a burglary alarm that I went to, and there was an actual burglary. And so they're a terrific deterrent, but also people unfortunately just make mistakes with them all the time. They don't tell the kid coming over to check the cats what the code is. They forget the code. And so you have all these resources headed that way. So that's why we require the registration, number one, so that we're aware of them. And all the services. So we have a false alarm reduction unit. And so when we have these fees, that's what pays those FTEs or assists in the general fund to pay those FTEs so that we can monitor this system and keep this very valuable system going.
Okay, so still trying to understand, how does the registration help for us to figure out if it's like the cat sitter versus?
So it's a connect. Let me think of it. It's a connection with them to get responsible use of an alarm system by asking that they adhere to Montgomery County policies and to get the training applicable. And then if for some reason they violate the training, if they violate their responsibility in it, because again, we're taking considerable resources to respond to an alarm call. So we need to ensure that they abide by the standards first, and that's why we have the registration, so that we can inform them and also hold them accountable if they abuse it. If the person comes over 7 times in a row, and we actually have a number of examples, Director Hook isn't here, of businesses that every morning we're having to send officers to check it out, and it's a false alarm every time. And we're taking them away from answering a 911 call. So it's making that connection, making sure they adhere to county regulations rather than, and also hold them accountable to it.
Okay, and so that's the business licenses
Both.
side of it, or so when individuals, register their alarms, are they like signing a contract, and that allows us that gives them an incentive to not have?
It gives them the incentive of having a police response by registering with the county.
But I'm trying to understand the part about how this makes sure that we're not sending officers to a pointless call. Is it because then they're going to be more likely with the cat sitter to behave well? Because is there something in the contract that says like we're gonna
You get
fine
fined.
you? Okay.
You get fined, and the fines graduate and get
Okay.
bigger and bigger. And that's how
Okay.
we've been able to eliminate a good number of false alarms.
Got it. Okay. And so if they're not registered, then we don't have the accountability tool of the fines.
Correct.
Got it. Okay. So then that makes sense. And I just want to make sure then that we have, I don't know if this would live within MCPD or another department, but somebody following up to make sure that everybody's getting registered so that they can get that response when they need it.
Yes, we put out a lot of alerts all the time. Again, Chief Augustine did reference, one of the things we've seen is an alarm system costs a good amount of money. In fact, I have an alarm system, which I won't advertise, but they jacked up the rates considerably last year, which caused me a little bit of heartache. But I still do it just because of the safety for my family and the community in general. It's a good deterrent. But there are people that can't afford it, unfortunately. And we want to continue to encourage people and maybe even encourage businesses that want to go out and create a very good alarm system that people with lower economic means can buy in, because, again, they're a great deterrent.
Yeah. Is Ring cheaper than the alarm systems? Do you know?
My counsel's not here to advise me.
I mean, you don't have to know this. I'm just wondering if that might be a cheaper mechanism for
what I will say is shop around. There's different options out there for monitoring, and that becomes an important part for us, ensuring
Right.
that we don't waste resources.
And maybe I should say on the record, I said I don't have a Ring, which I don't, but I do have an alternate system. So, okay, thank you. I appreciate it. I just want to make sure, because when I saw that 7,000 burglar alarm calls that we're not responding to, how are we making sure that we're not missing actual crime events? And if there's work that we can do to help improve that. But it's a difficult balance, because I'm sure even of the registered ones, we're having to send people out still for the cat sitter, et cetera, et cetera. And so how to get those addressed is something that we have to take into consideration as well. Thank you.
You had something to add, please.
Dale Phillips, Budget Director, Councilmember Mink. Just piggybacking on what AC Frank said, we do have FTs in our false alarm group who are proactively going out, working with both individuals and businesses who are having problems. Typically, it's the commercial businesses that have larger fines and often have repeated false alarms. So we actively go out, visit the locations, work with the individuals to make sure that we're getting that their system is set up properly and we're getting correct information. So.
Great. And does that same team, like if somebody is triggering an alarm but it's unregistered, do they also go and follow up with them to say, hey, we can't respond to this because it's not registered, but let's get you registered?
Absolutely.
Great. Thanks.
Okay, are we good?
I'm good.
Okay. Is this by acclamation for this one?
Yeah.
This is by acclamation.
Thank you very
Okay.
much.
Thank you. And with that, we are adjourned. Thank you very much.
I didn't want to out Liam setting off our alarm when